everybody. Welcome to the Critical Incident Investigation and Documentation Training Session. My name is Damaris Alvarado. I am the Section Chief of the Critical Incident Management Unit here at the Office of Long-Term Living. Presenting with me today is Beth Miambek. She is the registered nurse on our team. Good morning, Beth.
Good morning, Damaris. Good morning, everyone.
We have a few housekeeping items before we start. First, we want to let you know that the session is being recorded. By participating, you are consenting to the recording as well as to the use of any information shared during today's session. Your microphones will be muted. If you need to communicate with us, please use the chat box. We will be monitoring attendance and providing confirmation only if you stay for the entire 2 hours and show active participation. The PowerPoint and recording will be available on the Department of Human Services website soon after the November 8th session. Today's session will cover investigating critical incidents and documenting the investigation findings. We will not be discussing critical incident reporting today. Our presentation is composed of 2 parts. The first portion will cover incident management policy and procedure, and the second portion will cover the data entry completion or documentation of the incident report's final section in the Enterprise Incident Management System. We're asking for your help to help us manage time today. If you have questions while we are presenting, we are asking that you please make a personal note of your question. And if we do not provide an answer to your specific question while we're presenting, then we ask that you enter your question on the chat box, and we will do our best to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. A quick review of the previous session we offered back in March regarding critical incident reporting. We talked about what is a critical incident, what critical incidents are also reported to protective services, and we discussed reporting timeframes at length. We explained the 48-hour requirement to submit the first section of the incident report in EIM. We explained that for the 48-hour requirement, weekends and holidays are excluded. We briefly mentioned the investigation timeframes. There is a 24-hour requirement to begin an investigation and a 30 calendar day requirement to conclude the investigation and close the incident report in EIM. We'd like to remind you that in order to benefit from today's session, you should have completed the March 2023 incident reporting session. Today's objectives is to review critical incident investigation and documentation for all service coordinators within the home and community-based services arrangement, offering services for Office of Long-Term Living participants. We will be discussing who is responsible for investigating a critical incident, how long should it take to investigate a critical incident and close the incident report in EIM, and what sections of the EIM incident report must be completed. Our presentation is based on all of the policy documents that have been distributed by the Office of Long-Term Living, including the Critical Incident Management Bulletin, the waiver documents, and the Community Health Choices Agreement, which are all based on Chapter 52 of the 55 PA Code. These requirements indicate that Community Health Choices MCOs and service coordinators are responsible for investigating critical incidents that they become aware of or that are reported to them, and also responsible for documenting their investigation findings through our electronic data system, which is the only approved method of reporting and investigating critical incidents. Throughout today's presentation, we will be emphasizing that investigation of critical incidents and documentation of the investigation findings is an integral part of a service coordinator's responsibility, not a standalone function. A key element to critical incident investigation is understanding that MCOs and service coordinators are also mandated reporters under both the Adult Protective Services and the Older Adult Protective Services laws. We'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that Adult Protective Services, or APS, serves individuals ages 18 to 59. Older Adult Protective Services serves individuals ages 60 and older. These two entities are two completely separate agencies. They do not work under the same laws. And on your documentation, it is very important that you make a distinction between the two entities. The laws for Adult Protective Services and Older Adult Protective Services require that MCOs and service coordinators report any suspected abuse, neglect, exploitation, abandonment, or suspicious deaths. Based on the age of the participant, you will either be working with APS or with Older Adult Protective Services. When the incidents involve abuse, neglect, exploitation, or abandonment, they will be investigated by the Protective Services Agency, not by the MCO or the service coordinator. However, MCOs and service coordinators are required to document the investigation details from the Protective Services investigation. We will talk more about this later in the presentation. For now, I'd like to talk a little bit about training and education requirements. When MCOs and service coordination entities become enrolled to provide services for any of our programs in the Office of Long-Term Living, you are provided with a list of requirements. And one of them, which is very essential and very important, is that you must develop and implement written policies and procedures on incident management. These policies and procedures must include prevention and trend tracking, risk management, investigations, reporting, and notifications to the participants. It is important to understand that the staff training on all of these policies and procedures must occur upon hire and on an annual basis. We have spoken about individual rights when we had our last presentation in March, and we're all familiar with the fact that participants have the right to refuse to cooperate with critical incident reporting or with a critical incident investigation. Today, we want to see and look into how those individual rights play into the MCO and the service coordinator's responsibilities. While the participant has the right to refuse involvement, the MCOs and service coordinators must investigate critical incidents even when the participant does not want to be involved. A portion of the Critical Incident Management Bulletin is in front of you. It is from page 6 under section Reporting. It indicates that a participant has the right to refuse involvement in the critical incident investigation. In the second paragraph, it underlines that the critical incident must still be reported and the MCO or service coordinator must investigate the critical incident. Documentation is to be kept indicating that the participant did not wish to report the critical incident or that they declined interventions. The last sentence states that the MCO or service coordinator should also inform the participant that their services may be in jeopardy if they are putting themselves or others at risk. In other words, this requirement is emphasizing the importance of open communication between the service coordinator and the participant early on in their relationship, so that the participant can understand that you must report and investigate these critical incidents, even if they don't want you to. And it is very helpful that we explain to the participant that we're investigating these events because we need to ensure their health and welfare. Let's move on to defining some terms. What is a critical incident report investigation? The Incident Management Bulletin, as well as other incident management policies, define investigation as the steps taken to determine if a critical incident has occurred, if we need to get protective services involved, the actions that are needed to protect the health and welfare of the participant, and the actions needed to mitigate and prevent future incidents. In a nutshell, a critical incident report investigation is to take the steps and the actions necessary to ensure the participants' health and welfare and prevent future incidents. What are the requirements of a critical incident investigation? The MCO or service coordinator has 24 hours to begin the investigation of a critical incident. This is 24 hours and not one business day. It is 24 hours from the time the MCO or service coordinator becomes aware of the incident, either because they discovered the incident or they became aware by means of a report from a provider or any other source. Let's take a look at the list of critical incident categories that require investigation by the service coordinator or the MCO. The list of critical incidents is available in all of our policy documents. So any deaths that are suspicious, unexplained, accidental, and unplanned hospitalization, provider and staff misconduct, medication errors that result in a medical intervention, a service interruption, and as always, we add the emergency room visit category, which typically is a result of a serious injury, a medication error, or an illness. All of these require an investigation by the service coordinator, and that investigation must begin within 24 hours of becoming aware of the event. What other requirements do we have for a critical incident investigation? The Incident Management Bulletin also speaks to an on-site investigation for fact-finding. The critical incident facts, sequence of events, interviews of witnesses, and observation of the participant and/or environment is required. I'm going to repeat this because it's important to understand that the on-site investigation is a requirement. It is not optional. If the critical incident is medically involved, we recommend that a nurse or a nurse consultant accompany the service coordinator or the MCO staff when conducting the investigation. If the participant is in the hospital, the service coordinator or MCO staff should be meeting with hospital staff, whether the social worker or medical staff, to ensure that they are aware of your critical incident investigation and that you are included in the discharge planning. It is very important to understand that just because a participant is in the hospital receiving medical care, treatment, that does not mean that they are safe and that an investigation is not required. So in this context, when we talk about an on-site investigation, we understand it may not always be feasible to go to the hospital to start conducting an investigation. So we do know that it is possible that you will need to do the on-site visit when the participant goes home. In the meantime, you should be contacting the hospital staff to make sure that when that participant goes home or is ready to go home, you're aware of the discharge so that you can ensure services are in place before that participant goes home. So this is all part of your investigation. You may be asking, then why do we have a telephone investigation also listed on the policy documents? The reason for the telephone investigation is that sometimes as a service coordinator, you may review a critical incident report that comes in from a provider or a hospital staff person. And your review reveals that there are facts missing or you need additional information. In these instances, you may also do a telephone investigation. In other words, the telephone investigation will complement the on-site investigation, but it will never replace it. So again, those critical incident categories that we just reviewed require an on-site investigation. Speaking of conducted investigation, what if I did not receive formal investigation training? How do I conduct an investigation? If you noticed in all our policy documents, an incident report investigation is defined as fact-finding activities. And these fact-finding activities do not require formal investigation training. We also know that if the incident involves complex allegations for maybe abuse, neglect, exploitation, or abandonment, we do not handle those cases. They're handled by the Protective Services investigators. We also know that we use fact-finding activities in our daily lives. And these same principles, in conjunction with the education and training that are required to hold a service coordinator position, can be used when you're conducting critical incident investigations. Let's talk more about this. There are basic principles of fact finding. We have 3 to share with you today. Number 1, we identify the issue or problem. Number 2, we use critical thinking skills. And 3, we resolve the issue. We're going to look at some examples from daily life that I'm sure we've all experienced and perhaps not very conscious about what we're doing. We have been using critical thinking skills and fact-finding activities to resolve them. We're going to look at an example of losing our car keys, and we're going to look at another example, which is when the electricity was shut off. Scenario number 1 is about lost car keys. So following the principles that we just showed, we identify the problem, which is step number 1. The problem is that I need to leave for work or an appointment, and I lost my car keys. So step number 2, we use critical thinking skills, and we start going through the steps that we took that might have led us to lose our keys. We're thinking the last time we used them was to drive home from work yesterday, and we don't remember that anyone borrowed our car. So we mentally or physically are walking through the steps that we took when we got home yesterday. And we remember that we had been distracted because the kids were fighting in the car. So I remember now that I walked back into the house and I headed straight to the kitchen because I was either trying to decide what to make for dinner or what was on the menu for dinner. So I walk into the pantry for cooking supplies, and there I find my keys right next to the flour. So we do this on our daily lives. We do fact-finding activities when we have some that are small issues, and sometimes they are bigger issues. Let's look at maybe a bigger issue, which might be that my electricity was shut off. And we identify the problem that our electricity was shut off and I don't have a backup. So using critical thinking skills, immediately I'm thinking that I paid the bill, I don't know what happened, don't know why, my lights aren't working. So I'm calling the electric company. I want to know why they shut off my electricity. When I do call, the representative tells me I didn't pay the bill that was due on October 18th. And then I remember that between September and beginning of October, my daughter was in the hospital. I had a lot on my plate. Maybe I forgot to pay the bill. Let me check my account. I want to confirm if I sent the payment. And when I check my account, sure enough, my last payment was in September. I missed the payment in October, and that's why my lights are not working. My electricity was shut off because I forgot to pay the bill. So now I'm thinking, well, maybe if I make a payment over the phone, they can quickly turn my electricity back on. I call the electric company, make the required payment, and my electricity is turned back on. Again, we are really doing fact-finding and using critical thinking skills to resolve these daily life examples or issues that we come across. And now we're going to apply the same principles to a scenario where a service coordinator becomes aware of a participant's recurring missed services. Step 1 is identifying the problem. The participant has been without services for 2 days. Informal support was not available. And this participant in particular needs help with the activities of daily living. So it is definitely a problem for them. So moving on to step number 2, we're using critical thinking skills to resolve the issue. We contact the PASS agency. We want to ask why the paid caregiver has not been showing up for the participant. The PASS agency states that it's due to illness and not having backups in that geographical area. We contact the participant to ask what happened that the informal support has not been activated. And here we find out the participant actually did not call the informal support. She decided she's called so many times, she feels bad, and I'm going to just take care of myself. The service coordinator continues to investigate and ask the participant if she has contacted the informal support to ask if she could come maybe for an hour or two. The participant says no. The service coordinator reviews with the participant, okay, so then how did you manage your daily needs? And the participant says, I got by, I just couldn't really cook, so I haven't been able to eat well, but other than that, I was able to manage. The service coordinator investigates with the past agency if they offered a replacement, and they said no. The resolution is, now that the service coordinator has all this information, the first thing, as we have already discussed, is addressing health and welfare. So immediately addressing nutrition, because that is the activity that participant was not able to fulfill. And then offering a choice of a second agency for backup. The participant agrees to this. The next step is contacting informal support to review availability, because they're listed in the service plan as the backup. So now we want to confirm, are you really available and able to help the participant? The informal support states they're available at any time and they just need a call. So sometimes we run into these situations where the informal support was really not available, but we do have some situations where the participant is just not activating that backup plan. In this scenario, the service coordinator gathered all the facts, asked all the right questions, and was able to resolve the issue. In summary, the service coordinator must first ensure the participant's immediate health and welfare, complete the on-site fact-finding visit in order to observe the participant or the environment. Fact-finding will involve conducting phone interviews with caregivers, relatives, or witnesses, if applicable. Then the service coordinator will implement risk mitigation measures. Notify the participant within 48 hours that the critical incident has been resolved and how. And then document in the EIM entry all of that hard work the service coordinator has done, how the service coordinator mitigated that risk, and how the participant was notified of the resolution. There are some special circumstances in critical incident investigation. There are instances that will require suspending an employee or removing them from providing services in the programs offered by the Office of Long-Term Living. If this happens, the employee should not have contact with the participant while the investigation is ongoing. We ask that you refer to your own agency policies about whether that suspension should be with or without pay, again, while you're investigating the critical incident. But remember that if that critical incident involves a participant-directed employee, the suspension must be without pay, and you must activate the backup plan. Last but not least, if a critical incident involves the service coordinator, their entity, or the MCO, the incident should be turned over to the Office of Long-Term Living immediately. So now that as a service coordinator, I have taken the steps to resolve this critical incident, and make sure the participant is safe, how do I know that I have completed all the steps and I can close the incident report in EIM? Our policy indicates that no further action is required when the critical incident report meets all three of the following conditions. The facts and sequences of events are outlined with sufficient detail. Preventative action through the service plan is either not required or is implemented and documented. And 3, the participant is not placed at additional risk. Before you complete and close that critical incident report, ask yourself as a service coordinator, is any of these 3 steps not complete? And if the answer is yes, you're not ready to close the incident report. But if you can say that you've completed all 3 conditions, then you can close the incident report after clearly documenting all of your hard work. And we want to emphasize that we know that as service coordinators, you are committed and you are being very responsible with our participants' health and welfare. We know you are out there working hard, making sure services are in place, and that our participants are safe in the community. We just need you to document clearly all of that hard work, because if all that hard work is not clearly documented, then we cannot confirm it. How much time do I have to investigate a critical incident and close it in EIM? MCOs and service coordinators have 30 calendar days from the date of discovery of the incident to complete the investigation and enter the following information in the incident report in EIM. The actions taken to secure the health and safety of the participant, any changes made to the service plan as a result of the critical incident, and all the measures taken to prevent or mitigate recurrence of that event. Again, you have 30 calendar days from the time that you discover the incident. Please note that weekends and holidays are not excluded from the 30 calendar day count. So this is different from the 48-hour requirement to submit the first section of the critical incident in EIM. When we discuss the 48-hour requirement to submit the first section, we explained that weekends and state holidays are excluded from the 48-hour count. However, weekends and holidays are not excluded from the 30 calendar day count. As an example, if you've discovered a critical incident on November 1st, you must investigate and close the critical incident by December 1st. Note that there are 2 state holidays indicated by the blue stars. The fact that we had 2 holidays in between does not change the fact that you still have 30 calendar days to close that incident report. So please remember this when you are processing your critical incidents, entering information, and be aware of when you need to be closing them in EIM. If you are unable to complete your investigation within 30 days and close the critical incident in EIM within 30 days, then you must request an extension through EIM. On this slide in front of you, we have pasted a copy of the primary categories and how many extensions you are allowed to enter in EIM for each category. For any events involving abuse, death, exploitation, and neglect, you are able to request up to 3 extensions in EIM. For hospitalization and service interruption, you can request up to 2 extensions. And for the rest of the categories, you can request up to 1 extension. Once you have reached the maximum number of allowed extensions, if you require additional extensions, you must contact the Office of Long-Term Living using the approved extension request form, which is also illustrated on the slide. A word of advice: when requesting extensions in EIM, make sure that you do that before the due date of the critical incident report. We have implemented changes in EIM, which will not allow you to enter a late extension. So make sure that if your due date, for example, is November 3rd, you should be entering that extension today. When requesting extensions, you must also make sure that you have documented all of your actions, all of your investigation findings that you've had so far before you close that incident report or before you request that extension. There are special requirements with investigation of critical incidents. We touched on this earlier in the presentation when we mentioned that incidents involving suspected abuse, neglect, exploitation, or abandonment are not the responsibility of the MCO or service coordinator to investigate. These events are investigated by the Adult Protective Services or older Adult Protective Services investigators based on the age of the participant. However, the health and welfare of the participants is still the responsibility of the MCO and service coordinator. So we want to make sure it is understood that while APS or OAPS are investigating the incident, the service coordinator or MCO staff should be working in conjunction with that APS or OAPS worker to ensure that this participant is safe. You will not be investigating the allegations of neglect, abuse, or exploitation. You will be cooperating with the investigators in their fact-finding activities. So you would be required to provide any information that the APS or OAPS staff is asking up from you, as well as work with the PS investigator to coordinate any services that are provided by the MCO or the service coordination agency. In other words, anything that is covered within our waivers and Act 150 programs must be coordinated in order for the participant to receive, because protective services agencies cannot pay for any services that we can cover within our programs. We want to acknowledge and we want you to be sure that the Office of Long-Term Living understands it is a challenge to communicate and to gather information when working with protective services workers. We are working in establishing better communication processes, and we have been successful in doing so to some extent. So we want to share with you that because you are responsible for documenting the Protective Services investigation findings in the EIM incident report, we have communicated with the Pennsylvania Department of Aging, as well as with the Adult Protective Services staff, so that we can have a better method of communication, so that you have all the information you need to document their investigation findings in your incident report. And some of the things that we have in place will vary depending on the agency. So again, for Adult Protective Services, which serves individuals ages 18 to 59. As you are aware, APS is part of the Department of Human Services. And because of that, we have an easier communication process with them. So with APS, in the Community Health Choices arrangement, APS sends report of need notifications to the Office of Long-Term Living, as well as directly to the MCOs. In the fee-for-service world, the Office of Long-Term Living receives the notifications, and we issue an email alert to the service coordinator. So we have been sending you these emails, letting you know that we've received an alert from APS that there is a RON, a report of need for this participant, and how you need to reach out to the investigators so that you can start cooperating with them. It is very different with older adult protective services. So again, these are two completely different agencies and they operate very differently. For Community Health Choices, the older adult protective services staff is supposed to be sending a request of information form to the MCOs. When the MCO receives this form, it is always an indication that a report of need has been received for that participant. In the fee-for-service world, there is no formal communication process. The reason for this is the prohibitions in the OPSA regulations. However, in some instances, if the service coordinator can reach out to the OAPS investigator to let them know that they are the reporter of the allegations, the OAPS staff might be able to share some limited information so that the service coordinator is aware of what's going on and how the service coordinator can help the protective services worker mitigate the risk for the participant. This doesn't always happen. There will be instances where the OAPS investigator or the staff from the AAA will tell the service coordinator that they're unable to release any information. When that happens, you can either ask to speak with the supervisor and ask what is the specific reason for not being able to release that information to you. And whatever response you receive from them is what you're going to be documenting in the critical incident report. The fee-for-service service coordinators may become aware of a report of need for an individual 60 and older through different methods. It could be that you are the reporter of the allegations. It could also be that you received a call from hospital staff. The participant themselves may call you and say there was an OPSA investigator at my house. What's going on? So in any of these instances, please make sure that you document a critical incident report in EIM, even with your limited knowledge of the information. Now let's talk about investigation outcome notifications. When the protective services investigator completes their investigation, they need to decide whether the allegations were substantiated or unsubstantiated. For APS, again, within the Department of Human Services, and for the CHC participants, they send the determination information to both the Office of Long-Term Living and directly to the MCOs. In the fee-for-service world, the Office of Long-Term Living receives the notifications and we send the information to the service coordinator. In both instances, for CHC and fee-for-service, the investigation outcome is available from APS. If you can reach out and communicate with the investigator, they will give you the determination or the outcome of the investigation. It is not the same for older adult protective services. So OPSA will send a final disposition form or a crisis service plan to the MCO. That is the established process. We also know it doesn't always happen. For fee-for-service, again, there is no formal communication process because of the regulations. But again, if the service coordinator can communicate with the PS investigator that they are the reporter of the allegations, the OPSA investigator may be able to share limited information that is needed to mitigate the existing risk. If you've made all the efforts that you can possibly make to obtain the investigation outcome or to obtain any information about the report of need, and the AAA staff is saying, we're not releasing anything, we can't give you any information, what we're asking you to do is to please document your efforts in the incident report and use inconclusive in the PS investigation outcome field. We know that's in the verification of incident classification screen. And we're asking that you enter a very detailed note indicating all of your efforts and that the protective services staff were not able to provide any information. We do want to emphasize that we should not be seeing inconclusive for cases involving individuals ages 18 to 59, because this information is being provided to you by APS. We should only be seeing on occasion inconclusive for cases involving individuals that are ages 60 and older. Let's review the timeliness requirements and documentation requirements. So we've already discussed the 48-hour requirement to submit the first section of the report in EIM. That was discussed at length during the last presentation in March. Today, we emphasize that within 24 hours of having knowledge of the incident, the service coordinator must begin the investigation. And if the incident involves protective services, the service coordinator should be making contact with the protective services staff as soon as possible. We also reviewed that the service coordinator has 30 calendar days, including weekends and holidays, to either complete the investigation or document the protective services investigation findings in the final section of the critical incident report in EIM. A reminder about your incident report documentation is that we at the state office will be reviewing and viewing your EIM entries, and this is why we have been emphasizing that your incident report documentation is clear. And when you are documenting your investigation findings, please ask yourselves if you find yourself reading the critical incident report in a court hearing, would you be able to explain everything that happened with the event and how you were able to ensure the participants' health and safety? If you ask yourself this question, your documentation will be detailed and clear. We also want to remind you that incident reports are real-time documents and they must be kept up to date with the most recently known information and investigation actions. We are asking for at least weekly updates, and we also discourage the use of acronyms. So the updates are necessary because we receive at any given time inquiries from different sources about status of participants or events that have occurred. And if the critical incident report in EIM is not up to date, then we are in need to reach out to the MCO or to the service coordination entity for an update, when really we should always be able to just log into EIM, search for the participant's critical incident report, and know exactly what's going on at any time. So we're asking you to go into these critical incident reports at least weekly and make sure that they're up to date. Remembering that we know you're doing a lot of hard work out there, but it needs to be documented timely or it cannot be confirmed. The last reminder, but not least, is that all the information in critical incident reports is confidential and it should only be released to essential personnel, such as the police, medical, protective services, etc., and only when it's necessary to ensure the health and welfare of the participant, or when you need it, when you need to share that in order to complete the critical incident report. You may review more details about confidentiality requirements in Chapter 52.29 of the 55 PA Code. This concludes my portion of the presentation. Next, Beth will show an example of a critical incident report's final section completion. We want to emphasize that this is only an example. It is not intended to cover all the requirements of all incident categories or circumstances. It is general guidance for you to develop your own procedures to ensure compliance with our requirements. Information and training regarding incident investigation is really the responsibility of the service coordination entities. And for CHC, the responsibility is on the CHC MCOs to provide the training. If you need detailed information on how to capture, enter, and submit critical incidents in EIM, you may visit our HCSAS Learning Management System website, which contains guidance documents and very helpful information to guide you through the processes. I will now hand over the presentation to Beth to walk us through the completion of the final section.
Thank you, Damaris. During this segment of the webinar, we'll be utilizing EIM's test environment. To observe some technical mechanisms within the system. To be efficient with our time, information has been entered into each section. The intent is to reflect separate dated entries spanning the course of the investigation. As we review quality elements in documentation, a Word document will be used to enhance audience readability. Our presentation is designed to weave together incident documentation with critical incident requirements and documentation recommendations. Please anticipate brief pauses as we move between these experience-enhancing tools. We begin with a look of an incident in its first section. As you know, the first section is due within 48 hours of discovery. It is typically a snapshot of what happened, including immediate risk reduction. The incident initiator may be awaiting additional information to add to the first section. However, that should never delay timely submission at 48 hours. Documentation of any action occurring after the first section submission can be included in the final section by the service coordinator. In the example presented today, our PAS agency has initiated the incident in EIM. So we'll begin with a technical demonstration of the first section submission. As you can see, each of the screens has been completed, as indicated by the green check. The target information is the last screen in the first section. Upon completion of this section, with all fields completed, the initiator clicks Save and Continue. We arrive back on the incident details screen. The next step is validation. Clicking Validate would indicate the incident is ready for submission. However, an unsuccessful validation would signal the initiator to return to complete mandatory fields. However, we've gotten the green banner signal of a successful validation for this document. The next step would be clicking Submit. When an incident is submitted in the first section, the incident final section and either the MCO review or state management review will populate. In August of 2022, EIM was enhanced to align with policy, requiring investigation by the service coordinator. With that change, the service coordinator receives an EIM dashboard alert when an incident first section is submitted by a PAS agency. The PAS agency permissions are then changed to read-only. The service coordinator assumes responsibility for the incident. SC findings and protective service investigation details are entered into the incident final section. Before we do that, though, the service coordinator will take a review of what was documented in the incident's first section. The review can be most efficiently completed by a print summary. With the print summary, the contents of the first section are produced on a document, and it's easy for the reviewer to scroll through section by section to review the contents. An additional manner to complete this action would be to go through clicking section by section. But again, we feel it's the most efficient means by using the print summary. For now, I would like to just give you a summary of what the incident first section talks about. In this scenario, a direct care worker arrives early for a shift. They found the participant unresponsive on the bedroom floor. EMS was activated and the participant was transported to the hospital. The direct care worker reports off to the PAS agency supervisor, noting that the scheduled direct care worker was absent when she arrived. Earlier, we noted that there are 3 overarching service coordinator responsibilities. First, determine if there was a critical incident. If there was, determine what the problem is and identify the cause. From this first section review, we understand that this incident does meet the criteria for incident submission. The service coordinator recognizes neglect as the problem and confirms that this event does meet the criteria to complete the document. As the service coordinator and protective service investigator cooperate, the cause of the neglect will be identified. Corrective and preventative action plans will be implemented based upon the problem and the cause. We'll now begin to imagine that we're the service coordinator entering information into the incident final section. We'll begin in the SC, MCO, OLTL investigation summary section. As you can see, there are a variety of data entry fields. Some require the use of a drop-down, others have a calendar format for your use, but the bulk of this screen is narratives. Each of these narrative fields allows for up to 4,000 character counts. So it's a large amount of information that can be input. We're going to start by looking at this first category, a description of the incident. So we're going to toggle over, and for readability, we've pushed this information onto this document. So let's find out what happened here. As we review this incident, I want you to note where the writer conforms with basic documentation expectations, as well as critical incident management guidance. In previous webinars, we've addressed the documentation principle of ensuring that who, what, where, and when are each accounted for, and that there is sufficient evidence to support that this event meets the criteria for an incident. As we see at the top, we have a service coordinator who's identified by first and last name, Patricia Lemon. She receives a call from Susan Quinn, who is the supervisor at the local PAS agency. This occurred on October 14th of 2023 at 9:30 a.m. Susan Quinn reports that Lisa Simon, the direct care worker, arrived at the participant's home around 7:30 a.m. on October 14th, which was about 30 minutes before her scheduled shift was to begin. The direct care worker called out for the participant and received no response. Here again, pay attention to the fact that the who is identified through the direct care workers, the service coordinators, and the PAS agency supervisors. The what is that the direct care worker found the participant's home when she arrived. And then there's time frames that are listed, 7:30 a.m. The shift was to begin at 8 a.m. and a very specific date of 10:14. So criteria, basic documentation criteria have been met here. We didn't just document the first name of an individual and then give no context for how they relate to the situation. So as we move on in the storyline, we see that the direct care worker moved through the home and finally found the participant on the floor. She was in the bedroom. The participant was not responsive to voice and touch, but noted to be breathing. There are a series of other actions which are timeline specific. At 10:40, direct care worker called 911. At 7:55, EMS arrived. At 7:45, direct care worker called Jasmine Long. And here again, there's an explanation of the relationship. This is the participant's daughter who has power of attorney. At 8:15, EMS transports to the hospital. The daughter informed the direct care worker she would meet the ambulance at the hospital. At 9 a.m., the direct care worker called off to her agency and reported her clock out. She did also share that when she arrived, the direct care worker scheduled to be present until 8 that day was not in the home. So here's where we learn that the problem is neglect requiring medical attention with hospitalization, and the cause looks to be the absence of a scheduled direct care worker. Critical incident management requires immediate risk reduction, which again, we can see has occurred. The final two paragraphs in this block is information that was added to the original incident description found in the first section by the service coordinator. It's simply an expansion of that information, not a simple copy and paste without any further details. So the additional details that we learn now in the second section of the document is that Susan Quinn, the supervisor at the PAS company, did attempt to contact the direct care worker who was scheduled to work. She did not get an answer and left a voice message. The service coordinator asked if a protective service report of need had been called in, and the supervisor indicated no. So with that information, we now have the opportunity for the service coordinator, MCO, or OLTL's investigative action to begin. So we're in our second category here on the same screen. We're going to toggle back again and take a look at that information. Important things that I like to point out as we look at this information. You'll note again, there are a series of entries which are date and time specific. You'll note that it's listed in a chronological order so that each entry reads more like a story and it's easy to follow along. The storyline moves throughout the entire timeline that the incident is open, ending with documentation on October the 23rd down at the bottom. That's an important basic documentation tool to keep things in a date and time specific chronological or reverse chronological order. You'll also notice that everything described here are specific actions taken by the MCO or service coordinator. Documenting SC will follow up is an unacceptable statement. These are all action items in this field. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that although Protective Service is investigating, as mentioned earlier, the service coordinator is still responsible for health and welfare. Health and welfare should be obtained directly from the participant, using caution to mention anything about Protective Service in the presence of anyone other than the participant to avoid inadvertently alerting a target to an active investigation. If your participant is unable to speak for themselves, health and welfare can be assessed through questions directed to assigned representatives or other supporting individuals like direct care workers, hospital staff, or family. Ask routine questions in all areas of the participant's well-being based on authorized services in the service plan. Things like, do you have food? Are your utilities working? Is your direct care worker providing service according to the arranged schedule? Are your basic needs like bathing, grooming being made? Is your grocery shopping being done and laundry? During a hospitalization, health and welfare inquiries may include requests for hospital documentation or routine status updates. So in this piece here, you can see a lot of actions have taken place. The service coordinator completes mandatory reporting through the PS hotline at 10 a.m. She makes a series of calls, which are timeline specific, and determines that the participant is admitted to the hospital and is provided with the social worker's name for outreach. The MCO receives an APS priority RON, and with that notification, the service coordinator completes the following required actions. At 4:15, a health and welfare check finds the participant at the hospital under treatment. Participant confirms welfare and provides additional details about what happened. She allowed the direct care worker to leave shift early for a family emergency. The service coordinator does notify the participant that an incident report will be made to the Office of Long-Term Living. The service coordinator reaches out to Mary Edith, the Adult Protective Service investigator, to begin cooperating. Then on the 15th of October, in the morning, the service coordinator updates the PAS agency with the date of the RON that was made. The service coordinator also arranges an on-site visit to see the participant at the hospital. On the 16th of October, visit is made to the hospital by the service coordinator. A team meeting is held with the participant, Jasmine Long, the daughter, Darren Toms, the social worker, Mary Edith, the Protective Service investigator, and the service coordinator. The discussion about how the fall occurred is had, and the participant reinforces that that she did not feel the direct care worker was at fault. She allowed her to go home early, and the daughter supported the participant's wishes to continue working with that direct care worker following discharge. Before leaving the hospital, the service coordinator also manages to touch base with Linda M., the unit nurse, to talk about discharge plans, which have been arranged for the 17th of October. The nurse notes that the physician did recommend short-term rehab, but that the participant has declined that, wanting to go home. Daughter and power of attorney agrees with the participant's decision. It's noted that there will be medication changes and in-home therapy upon discharge. The participant signs the release for the social worker to email the discharge summary to the service coordinator. On the 16th at 4, the service coordinator updates Susan Quinn, and a discussion is had about the need for retraining of the direct care worker to better understand the requirements for calling off in the middle of a shift. On October 23rd, the service coordinator receives an email from the investigator indicating that the allegations of caregiver neglect have been substantiated. A service plan is emailed to the social worker, noting that the participant has declined recommendations and that the target has received retraining on October the 18th. Important points to be made here are that in this documentation, it's very clear that the service coordinator completed and documented all required critical incident management requirements, such as the mandated reporting element, health and welfare check, participant notification of an incident report, contact with protective service investigator, and they used a combined on-site visit in this situation, which promotes coordination. There was communication with hospital staff, which is also a required element. They confirmed participant choice and documented participant decline of recommendations. You'll remember that this was mentioned on a previous slide on individual rights and SC responsibility. And the documentation also promotes the idea of ongoing communication with PAS agency and protective service investigator to ensure that the preventative corrective action plans have been implemented. As we move on, we see that all identified risks for this participant who is medically complex and physically frail are hospitalization, falls and injury, and abuse or neglect. There's an additional comment that Jasmine Long, the power of attorney, manages the participant's finances and believes that there's no concern for financial exploitation at this time. The SCMCO risk mitigation actions taken, which is the last field within this screen, again, promote a timeline, chronologically correct presentation of information. In this, we see that on the 14th, there were very specific actions taken with the RON being placed, health and welfare check, and hospital contact for discharge planning. On the 16th of October, there's a team meeting with discharge planning arrangements being made. On the 17th, the service coordinator visits the participant at home and verifies that waiver and non-waiver services, which are reflected on the service plan, have active authorizations. On the 18th, the service coordinator confirms that the direct care worker retraining has occurred. And on the 24th, the day that the investigation ends and the document is prepared for submission, a follow-up contact is made with the PAS agency, verifying authorized services in place, and a health and welfare contact is confirmed through outreach to the participant and the daughter. It's important to note that the service coordinator and MCO risk mitigations taken screen uses this consistent documentation method where entries are dated and entered in a chronological order. Documentation in this area could have been strengthened by using services listed with the appropriate amount, frequency, and duration. This piece of the narrative lacks any indication about how personal service hours to the participant will be received or how they'll even be distributed over a 7-day week. So now what the individual would do, the service coordinator, at the completion of this screen, and obviously these entries are being submitted as they occur, which is required under critical incident management. They would save and continue moving on to the next screen, the Protective Services Investigation Documentation screen. As we move through this information, I'd like to point out a few basic pieces of information about Protective Services communication. As a reminder, an adult protective service investigator will not be assigned if the service coordinator is alerted to a no-need report of need. The service coordinator will act as the investigator in those cases. I also would like to present to you some basic questions that you can ask of adult or older adult protective service investigators as you cooperate with them. Important questions that will help drive the information that's being added into the incident and EIM include, can you share what allegation type or types you're investigating for? Occasionally, more than one allegation type is reported. When this occurs, the service coordinator must enter a separate incident for each type. Have you made a determination? If so, can you please share it with me for documenting in the incident? While the PS investigator could make a determination at any time in the investigation, they do have 20 days to make the determination. An important note, an incident is not ready for final submission until the Protective Services determination has been received from the investigator or from OLTL or through the MCO and appropriately documented. Another question could be, was there a service plan developed? Did the participant agree? Can you share a copy so I can ensure the goals are incorporated into the participant's service plan? Protective service plans do not need to be uploaded to the incident. Rather, it's important to ensure that the goals in the service plan are reflected in the preventative and additional corrective action screens within the incident. So we'll take a little bit of a look here at what happened in the first section of the Protective Services investigation documentation, where we document the additional details and risks identified. We find that Mary Edith, the Adult Protective Service investigator, told the service coordinator this is a non-priority RON, the date it was received, and that the category was neglect. Notice that the documentation in this incident reflects classification as non-priority, allegation type as neglect, and an original RON date. This is all important information needed to complete the incident, both in the first and final sections. The background reported by the Adult Protective Service investigator to the participant was that the participant was to be receiving 24/7 care over 2 12-hour shifts, which the service coordinator confirmed. On the 13th, a direct care worker, Louise C., clocked in at 7:59 p.m. On the 14th, around 7:30 a.m., another direct care worker found the participant on the floor. Immediate medical care was provided, and through hospitalization, the target removed from access to the participant. The service coordinators documented that protective service feels ongoing risks include future neglect by the direct care worker, and also the need for nursing facility placement for strengthening and reconditioning. One other piece before we move forward on this is the use by the service coordinator when documenting in this section and throughout the incident of the correct protective services identity. You'll note that the correct term to reference adult protective services, which is only for participants who are under the age of 60 years, has been used in this incident. As noted earlier, older adult protective services serves those ages 60 and up, whereas adult protective services serves those between the ages of 18 and 59. Sometimes Liberty Healthcare, or the acronym APS, is used in incidents for participants over the age of 60. However, Liberty Healthcare and the term Adult Protective Services, or the abbreviation APS, should not be used when working with residents who are over the age of 60. We encourage you to be diligent to identify the correct entity and to use the correct terminology when documenting. As we move forward, we see that the protective service investigator applied some risk mitigation measures. On the 16th, the protective service investigator arrived at the hospital, provided a service plan, which is documented as declined by the participant. Informed choice and participant refusal conversation is documented. Participant and daughter and power of attorney acknowledge and accept these potential risks. On the 23rd, the investigator does email the service coordinator a final determination of substantiated and provides a copy of the service plan. In the final pieces of this page or this screen, we find that the category was a service plan developed is responded to with a yes, and that the service plan details are clearly documented. For the remainder of our session, we will work directly from the test environment. So the next screen we see is the target information screen. Questions about a target are found throughout the first and final incident sections. It's important to note that a target could be a paid provider or an unpaid informal support, like a family member or friend. The service coordinator must be clear documenting throughout the incident if a target is a paid provider or an unpaid informal support. The target information screen that you are seeing here is used to report any target. Anytime a target is identified, paid or unpaid, the response to the initial question, were there targets identified, will be a yes. However, the question found in both the first and final sections asking, was the provider selected the target of an allegation of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, is very specific to a paid provider. When there is a paid provider, the response to that question should be yes. When a paid target is identified, that also will impact how the service coordinator completes the provider information screen in the incident first section and in the verification of provider information screen in the final section. When a paid target is identified, that agency's information should display on the provider information screens. We'll take a closer look at the provider screen shortly. Additionally, I'd like to note that if the MCO or service coordinator is the alleged target, the investigation is turned over to the Office of Long-Term Living. Let's take a look at the functionality of EIM by looking at this target screen. EIM uses tables to store information in an organized manner after data has been input into the open fields. The table displays towards the top of the screen. Using this table, let's take a look at the functionality. You'll note that we have one line that is filled in with information about our target. Note the shading of the line matches the overall shading of the background. When I hover over the line, it darkens. When I click the line, it changes to a shade of light blue. That color change is an indicator that an action can be taken. Possible actions include delete, edit, or add. With the line highlighted and clicking edit, all of my information populates at the bottom half of the screen and can be changed or corrected as needed. Entering a piece of information and clicking save immediately changes the information available in the table. I can re-highlight that area, edit again, and change my content. Clicking save ensures the information is embedded back in the table. That's one potential action that I can take. Another way that I can change this table is clicking again and clicking add. I can enter information into the bottom half of the screen. And I can save. Another feature that I can do is highlighting and deleting, completely eliminating that line from the table. We'd like to point out that occasionally incident initiators and service coordinators find it challenging to submit an incident. That can occur when a line is added into the table inadvertently. This line isn't always identified, particularly if it's entered without any information in it at all. So at the time of submission, if you're reverted back to any one of the screens which have a table embedded, it's important to look to see if you have an incomplete line. Choosing the appropriate action, either to complete the line or to highlight and delete, will allow the user to move forward with submission. As you can see, the screen for witness statements is designed very much like the target screen. It offers a first question: are there any witnesses? Your options are yes and no. There is a built-in table which populates based on information which is entered in the fields below. In our situation, we see that Lisa Simon was the witness. All of her information has been filled in here, including contact information, and a dated and time-specific witness statement has been included. Again, you have a 4,000 character count field, so this statement can be as long as necessary. Anytime you arrive at a situation where you have more information that fits into a field, we ask that you simply make a comment at the end of the statement or at the end of the discussion where you're going to put the remaining information. You might remember that we have a document upload feature. More information can be put on a document and uploaded or put into another section. There's a lot of space within each of our incidents. So moving on, we find the hospitalization screen. Again, the format is relatively simple. You start with an initial question. Was there a hospitalization? There's a yes or a no prompt. Selecting yes, we anticipate that all of the fields on this screen should be completed with information. The use of the term unknown is unacceptable unless you say unknown and you provide a meaningful explanation why you're unable to find the answer to the prompt above. The unknown can be described at the very bottom of our screen in the field Add additional discharge information not captured above. As you're aware, discharge instructions are essential to assuring health and welfare, and they may prompt changes to the participant's service plan. Understanding what these actions are can help from a preventative view to avert rehospitalization. Service coordinators help ensure and monitor compliance with new orders and follow-up visits. One other quick thing I'd like to point out here. Had our participant elected to go to the facility for rehab, clicking this line here, transferred to another facility, nursing home or rehab, would enable the service coordinator to finalize the document and submit. We'll focus a little bit on the preventative corrective actions here. As you can see, we have information already built into the table. I can't really view it though. The way to view information is to click and highlight and click on edit. That opens up all of your fields and allows you to review all of the content. Both the preventative and additional corrective action screens utilize the same table building functionality that you're familiar with from the target and witness screens. Preventative corrective actions are required for all incidents. In this case, the direct care worker obligated to adhere to employment-based actions for early shift dismissal and having found non-compliant in that was required to have retraining. Staff retraining is one of the drop-downs, one of many different drop-down options, and was selected as a preventative corrective action for this incident. Our participant also refused recommendations and accepted risk. The Critical Incident Management Bulletin requires documentation of participant refusal. As you can see, that has also been added as an additional risk mitigation action in this situation. I won't linger here because this is designed to act in the same way functionally as our prior screens, but we did take time to enter an additional preventative corrective action, which includes retraining of the family. We found that the participant and family did not understand the direct care worker's obligation to properly call off before she left shift. As you can see on our referrals and notification screens, excuse me, there's a simple question at the top, were referrals made? Again, we are two options, yes and no. We made a referral to the service coordination agency in this event. More importantly, we see two required notifications. These are prompted questions to remind the service coordinator of these mandatory actions. The first asks, was the participant notified within 24 hours that a critical incident report had been filed? Again, the drop-down offers two choices, yes and no. In this situation, with the PAS agency being the first to discover, and understanding that the PAS agency is obligated to report the incident to the service coordinator within 24 hours, it's important for the service coordinator to take that opportunity to ask the PAS agency if this action, 24-hour reporting to the participant, has been completed. If it hasn't, the service coordinator should follow through, notify the participant, and mark this a yes. Likewise, for the resolution, that is an action that's obligated to the service coordinator to complete. When the service coordinator has a conversation with a participant or responsible person about any measures taken to reduce either the immediate risk or prevent recurrence, actions like talking about hospital discharge, clarifying dates for follow-up appointments, talking about a new PAS agency, diet or medication changes, behavioral health referrals, and the list goes on and on. Each of those discussions, which addresses risks, fulfills the service coordinator's responsibility for this action. Therefore, a yes response can be built in anytime the service coordinator does any of those things with the participant or responsible party. The provider information screen has been mentioned earlier. In cases involving abuse, neglect, or exploitation, when the MCO, service coordinator, or PAS agency staff is identified as the target, it's important to ensure that that entity's name and information displays on this screen. The provider named in the first section will automatically populate here. If this is incorrect information based upon the outcome of the investigation, we can change this information. So let's imagine that the PAS provider on this screen is not correct. To make the correction, the individual selects this blue hyperlink, select provider and location, a pop-out box appears. Using the provider name or other identifiers like the MPI number, we can change this identity to the provider who is found to be the target. Save and continue allows that information to be changed, so the correct target is reflected on the provider information screen in the final section. It's important to note that doing that also requires that when we arrive at our last screen now, this is the verification of incident classification screen. One important note to make is that was the provider selected? So you've just selected a provider on the provider information screen. Was that provider selected on that screen the target of an alleged abuse, neglect, or exploitation? To which we will answer yes. We know that the provider listed there is exactly who we want it to be. When we arrive at this screen, it's important for a very focused evaluation that the dates and the times listed on this screen, which there's only one time, are appropriate based on the information collected. We do a top to bottom review, checking the dates. The next thing we will look at here is the secondary category. It's currently marked provider-associated paid caregiver, which is correct. The Adult Protective Service investigator did substantiate for caregiver neglect. The fall category pre-populates from whatever was entered in the first section. If it's incorrect based on the outcome of the investigation, it can be changed. And here again, we can't overemphasize the need to ensure that this question that's been answered is very specific to the provider target. Had our target been identified as a non-paid or unpaid support system, the answer to this question would have been no. In our situation, it was a paid provider. We then verified that the correct referral is marked. In our situation, this was an Adult Protective Services case, so we marked this yes. We did not involve older adult protective services based on this participant's age. The correct original RON date is reflected in the date of referral to Adult Protective Services, and we've made sure that the Protective Services investigation outcome is properly documented. I'll emphasize again, this information is collected from Protective Services. This is not the opinion of our service coordinators or what the belief is about the outcome. This is genuinely information that's collected from Protective Services that's used to complete this particular open field, substantiated, unsubstantiated, inconclusive. Had the individual service coordinator received a no-need RON, we also have an indicator for that. We know that the service coordinator made follow-up with the participant. The preventative corrective action plan was implemented, and the participant indicated that health and welfare was ensured. So we elected resolved health and welfare insured for this particular case. COVID-19 was not involved, so we were able to select a no here. And with that, we were able to complete the incident, which takes us back to the incident details screen. On this screen, I'd only like to point out one thing for you. We do have the ability, and I see we're still populating here, everyone, so I'm going to slow down a little bit and allow it to populate. There we go. On this screen, Damaris had mentioned extensions and how important they are to ensuring that if we're not able to submit a document in 30 days, we extend the date. The due date is shown over here. The feature for report extension, if you've never had the opportunity to take an extension, is on the far right. It's the paper document icon, which when you click on it, opens a new field and allows for you to enter the appropriate information to complete a full extension. We're not going to take time for that today. We're going to come back here. At the time that this is ready for submission, whether it's directly at 30 days or at whatever the extended new due date is, there are some important questions to be asked, and we've covered them earlier. How do you know this incident is ready for submission? We ask a series of questions. We make sure, first of all, that the content is thoroughly and accurately a reflection of what happened, and that basic standard documentation guidelines have been followed. So in this, we ask, are the facts and the sequences outlined sufficiently? It's a living document. Were weekly updates added to this in some order, chronological or reverse chronological? The answer is yes. Are all the updates in here sufficient to reflect the actions taken to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the participant? The answer is yes. Logical placement allows us to read through this, I'll call it story, to understand what happened and to see that everything actionable was completed. The preventative corrective action plan is well documented. And at the end, we were able to answer the question, did the SC ensure that the participant is not placed at any additional risk? So that allows us then, as a service coordinator, to move through the next steps, which would include a validation before final submission. So I appreciate your attention and time today. At this point, I'm going to turn the conversation back over to Damaris so she can round out the conversation for us.
Thank you, Beth. We appreciate the detailed explanation of how to complete the final section. We have a few slides to get through here, and then I want to jump over to the questions on the chat so that we can try to answer them before we adjourn today. Some information for you. On the screen is the provider operations hotline. For questions or to report any concerns with providers or service coordinators, you may call the 800 number, or you may email the provider operations staff. These would be issues, for example, if a service coordinator is not receiving timely critical incident reports from a provider, or if there are any issues, again, with the provider agencies. If the issues are regarding participants in the Community Health Choices program, you do need to contact the participants' MCO. If the issue is with the MCO staff, you need to escalate within the MCO. And then if that doesn't get resolved, you may contact OLTL, and you may use the provider operations hotline and email address. Moving on to more links for information, we do have incident management and protective services training available for service coordinators on our contractor's website. It is Deering Consulting, and the links will be dropped on the chat box for your access. The same with the links for the HCSS Learning Management System. Do not underestimate the information that is available on the LMS system. Please visit that page if you feel that you have questions about how to enter a critical incident in EIM, what buttons I should be pressing, and for any questions regarding actual critical incident reports, you may either contact your supervisor if you're a service coordinator, or the MCO staff if you are a CHC provider. Here's the EIM link also if you don't want to access it through HCSS. And the 2023 Critical Incident Management Bulletin link is also here for you. If you are not aware, this incident bulletin was revised in 2023 to address some of the changes that have occurred throughout the years. However, the actual policy on reporting and investigating critical incidents remain unchanged. And then here's the number to the HCSS help desk. This will be only for system issues, not for critical incident reports related issues. You may contact them by phone call or by email for anything related to an actual critical incident report for a participant. If you cannot get answers within your agencies, you may send an email to the RA resource account. It is the EIM implement@pa.gov showing on your screen, and that will also be dropped on the chat box. I am now going to scroll through the chat box to find the questions and hopefully provide answers. Some questions that I found on the chat box are related to the information we already provided during the March 2023 training sessions. So if you have not completed that session, or you still have questions about reporting critical incidents, how long between a provider and a service coordinator receiving the report, all of those things were covered in the March 2023 session, and all the material is posted on our DHS website. The link to the website will also be dropped on the chat box. Scrolling, there's a question here about service coordinators. It says now liable to visit participants in the hospital when a critical incident occurs. So I did make it very clear that there will be instances where you will not be able to visit the participant at the hospital. The requirement based on policy and regulation is that you conduct an on-site visit within 30 days, within the 30 days allowed for the critical incident report investigation. Of course, you need to ensure health and welfare of the participant as soon as possible. There is a comment question here. Tips for getting a staff to be suspended if they are an AP when the participant is using participant-directed model. So in that case, you should be contacting the, first of all, letting the participant know that It is mandated that when an employee is the target of an allegation, they must be suspended without pay, and that they cannot have contact with a participant, and that is what policy indicates. And then the payer agency, I believe is PPL, I forget the name of that. They should be contacted to be aware of what's going on. But that is, I mean, the participant is the boss, we understand that. But we need to make sure they understand this person needs to be suspended. So contact with the financial agency needs to be made in order to make this happen. If I didn't address that question, Jamie, you can email me directly and I will try to look into it more for you. There's a follow-up question here. Is the hospital visit for any EIM or APS? The hospitalization critical incident must be investigated regardless of where the participant is. So if there's a hospitalization critical incident, the service coordinator has to investigate the critical incident. If protective services is involved and the communication is that there's a neglect or abuse allegation, the service coordinator is not going to be investigating that critical incident. Protective services is going to be investigating. But if your category of the critical incident is hospitalization, the service coordinator will be investigating the critical incident. And then another follow-up question about hospital visits, whether they're required for all incidents or admissions. So hospitalizations is a critical incident category, which requires an investigation. It also requires an on-site visit. The on-site visit does not always have to happen at the hospital. If the participant has been discharged when you become aware of the incident, then you will be making the on-site visit at the home. What we're saying here is that do not take the approach that because a participant is in the hospital, you don't need to investigate the critical incident, or that an on-site visit does not need to take place. You still need to do the on-site visit. If you can't do it in the hospital because you're unable to get in, the participant doesn't want you coming in the hospital staff is not allowing you to come in, whatever the case might be, you need to document that in your critical incident report. And then you have to make sure the on-site visit happens at some point while you're investigating, and is probably and most likely going to happen at the home. But to answer the question, is a visit required for all incidents? If protective services is not investigating, yes, an on-site visit is required. That is the last question that I have on the chat box. I will give it a few minutes since we have some time left. There are some questions about the PowerPoint and recording from today. We will not be sending links to the material, but the material will be posted on the DHS website, and the link is being dropped in the chat box. Now, it's not going to be available until after November 8th, which is when we have our last session. There's a question about extensions, report extensions in EIM. The question says, in case of an APS investigation that requires assistance from legal agents, such as lawyers, and needs long periods of time to be closed due to court meetings, etc., how should extensions be placed? It is the same process. There's only one process to enter extensions in EIM. There's an icon on the incident detail page that you press in order to enter the extensions. You are subject to the 3 allowed extensions within EIM. If you need additional extensions after the 3 are used up, you must contact the Office of Long-Term Living to request an additional extension using the approved extension request form that we shared during today's presentation. The extension request forms are available on the HCSS LMS site, and they were also distributed via listserv. If you don't have a copy of that, if you are a CHC service coordinator, you should be contacting your MCO. If you're in the fee-for-service world and you do not have the extension request form, you may send us an email at the eiimimplement@pa.gov email address on the screen. Please remember, when you enter extensions in EIM, the extension should be requested for 30 calendar days at a time. If you request an extension for 10 days, you're going to lose an extension. So make sure that you enter each extension for 30 days. The next question, if an allegation is under investigation and is participants only caregiver and they refuse another, what can be done for services? If the allegation is on the caregiver. If the participant is refusing services from another caregiver, then you need to document in the incident report the participant is refusing your interventions, and they need to acknowledge the risk. You may offer respite, any other services that may be available, but we do understand at the end of the day, if they don't want any caregivers coming into the home, it is really their right. As long as we can document our efforts, that's all that we can do for participants who do not want to accept help. And then there's a clarification. I know we ran out of time, but the clarification is the hospital visit separate from the required trigger visit if the participant accepts? No, it doesn't need to be separate. So if the participant is accepting the trigger visit, then that can be acceptable as far as the on-site, and it fulfills the requirement for the critical incident investigation. All right, everyone, it's 11:31. We're out of time. Thank you for your participation and have a great rest of your day.